Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's MRC webinar, LATAM Payment Landscape of Mastering the Most Used Alternative Payment Methods, which is being presented by dLocal. I'm Mike Splickle, U.S. Program Manager for the MRC. We're glad to have you join us today and appreciate your time. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, I wanted to provide a quick overview of the Merchant Risk Council. We're a nonprofit trade association for e-commerce fraud and payment professionals. We were established in 2000 by a group of merchant leaders who shared a goal of optimizing e-commerce payments while enhancing their organization's risk management efforts. In the years since, our organization has expanded considerably. We currently support over 550 member companies in over 30 countries. In addition to webinars like this one, you can stay on top of current trends in the industry by attending MRC events throughout the year. Registration is now open for the MRC's spring conferences, MRC Vegas 2019, which is actually next week, and MRC London 2019, which is in mid-May. We also have two regional networking events coming up next month in April. The MRC is doing a Women in Payments and Fraud event in London on Thursday, April 4th. And we have a regional networking event, Connects event, what we call it, in Dublin, Ireland on Thursday, April 11th. For more information on any of these events, please just visit the Merchant Risk Council website, which is merchantriskcouncil.org. To see other upcoming webinars and events, or for more information about the benefits available to MRC members, please just visit our website. For attendees, we'd ask that you make use of the questions panel in GoToWebinar to ask any questions you may have, which we'll discuss at the end of the broadcast today. We'll get to as many as we can in the time that we have. I'll now turn things over to today's presenters. We're very pleased to have two presenters from dLocal sharing their insights today. Michelle Goldfed, who's the Vice President of Growth at dLocal, and Federico Mazzoli, who's a Product Manager at dLocal. So Michelle and Federico, thanks so much for presenting. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Mike, for the introduction. Thanks, MRC, for hosting us today in this webinar. We are super excited to present today the most relevant payment methods in Latin America. We'll start by going quickly through the agenda for today. So we'll talk about first how local people pay in emerging markets, but specifically in Latin America. What are the consumer habits there? What are the most relevant alternative payment methods in the main markets, going from Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, Chile, Peru, Uruguay, and Paraguay. And then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. For those of you who are not familiar with dLocal, we are a 360 payments technology focused in emerging markets, doing both pay-ins and payouts for over 450 merchants, covering 2.3 billion emerging consumers. So we'll be talking about the specifics of the different relevant locally payment methods in these countries. So let's start by understanding the difference between processing a transaction with an international acquirer versus using the domestic rails, using a domestic acquirer. You may know that obviously Visa, MasterCard, those cards can be processed internationally. There are many of these Visa and MasterCard cards that are for local usage only. So people with local Visa will not be able to buy, for example, from an e-commerce site that is not in the same country. And then we have the local brands as well. The case of Naranja in Argentina, the case of Elo or HyperCard in Brazil. So if you combine both the international brands but locally issued cards and the local brands, you get a lot of cards in these markets in LATAM that are only possible to operate with a domestic connection, with a domestic acquirer. On average, 15% of total cards in these countries in LATAM are international. In some cases, depending on the country, it can be as low as 10%. In some cases, can be a bit higher in the 30s, 40s. Then around 50% are local credit cards. Again, this is a combination of the Visas and MasterCards. There are for local usage only, plus the local brands. So if you combine these local brands and the cards that are eligible for local transactions only, both credit and debit, we get to around 80% of the market share when it comes to Latin America. So obviously, and continuing with cards, installments play a big role in Latin America. A lot of people chooses to pay with installments. In Colombia, for example, we are talking about 70% of people that will pay, from different industries, different verticals with installments. In Brazil, around half of the online transactions are sold with installments, and it's around the same rate for the rest of Latin America. Obviously, it makes sense to present the installments option when the average ticket is big enough or high enough to make it relevant to pay, to split the payment in different installments. And when it comes to the credit that is being given to the user, it can be either the issuing bank providing that credit or the merchant itself financing that transaction, basically, that credit. Again, we see this behavior across different industries, from clothing, appliances, restaurants. Obviously, for travel with a high average ticket is extremely relevant. Mobile phones, retail in general. So it's extremely relevant to offer installments. Obviously, it depends on the average ticket, depends on the industry. But when it comes to Latin America, you need to offer installments, and the only way to offer installments is by going with the local domestic acquirers. So obviously, cards are extremely relevant. If we think about subscription-based model, obviously, having a card being auto-charged every month is comparable, and we have a better conversion rate. But we cannot forget that cash is extremely relevant in this market. If we take the example of Boleto in Brazil, which is by far the largest payment method in the market, with more than 50 million boletos issued each month. And this ticket, this voucher, can be paid either at the corner shop, or any bank branch, even with internet banking online. And this will obviously increase the chances of the merchant to be able to get to the entire population, and not only to people that are bunkerized or have access to a credit card. And also, it's very relevant to keep in mind that Boleto was traditionally designed to be operated in a computer. And you can see in the right-hand side of the screen that image of the Boleto. That's how it looks like. But it's important to keep in mind that 20% of all Boleto transactions today are done through mobile devices. So it's also good to optimize the Boleto layout for mobile devices as well. Also, based on the data that we get based on the consumer behavior and the transactions that go through the local, we see that from around 60% to 90%, depending on the industry, depending on the merchant, of all the Boleto transactions are paid through internet banking versus going physically and paying with cash. Mexico is a very similar example where Boleto, basically the equivalent for Boleto is OXXO. Even the bank population chooses to pay with cash, and OXXO with over 18,000 stores in Mexico is obviously a very relevant option. So in the case of Chile, even in a country where they have a highly banked population, even in LATAM, they have the highest financially sophisticated population with 98% of the market having access to at least one financial product. Still, cash methods and debit cards in this case are extremely relevant versus paying with credit cards, where Servipack is the king of the cash methods, where the flow is very similar. People will print out a ticket and go to any of the Servipack stores and pay with cash, or they can pay with a debit card with their bank account, basically through WebPay, Red Compra online, by following a few steps that we will show later on in this webinar. So summarizing the different behavior across countries in LATAM, we can see that around 50% of the population will choose to pay with either local credit or debit cards, around 30% with cash, as we mentioned, Boleto, Servipack, Rapipago, and Pago Fácil in Argentina, and the likes, 15% with credit cards, and around 5% with local bank transfers. So this is obviously an average. This varies across different markets. Let's, after the introduction, let's jump right into the relevant payment methods in each of these markets.
So yeah, go ahead, Mitch.
So in the case of Brazil, we obviously, as we said, we have Boleto as being the king for cash. All the bank transfers, they're done through TEF, which is a local ACH system. And then credit and debit cards, obviously the relevant international cards like MasterCard, Visa, Amex, Diners, Discover, and the likes, and the local cards such as ELO, HyperCard. And we can see on the left-hand side of the screen, obviously, the distribution among the different payment methods. And we will go in particular now to Boleto and to see how the flow looks like, what are the caveats, and what are the considerations that we need to take care of with that.
Thanks, Michel. So as we just mentioned, we're going to focus on Boleto Bancário, which is by far the biggest cash payment method in Brazil. So Brazilians use Boleto to pay almost anything in Brazil, from their services like water and TV to buy products online and or offline. There's a huge coverage in Brazil with more than 200,000 payment locations, and it's very tied to the Brazilian culture. Everyone in Brazil knows about Boleto. Everyone knows how it looks like and where to go and pay for them. Basically, with 200,000 payment locations in Brazil, you're very likely to have either a bank or a kiosk where you can pay for a Boleto just a couple of blocks away from your home. And the key aspect of cash payment methods like Boleto is that the user doesn't need to have a bank account. Just by, let's say, printing this ticket and going to the bank or to the kiosk, they can pay with cash, and there's no need to be bankerized. And in the case of Boleto, it's very versatile because it lets the user either go ahead and walk to one of these banks or kiosks and pay for them in a physical location, or they can also choose to pay it online via their home banking site. In the case of Boleto, if the user has the mobile app of the bank, they can simply scan the barcode with the app, or they can just enter the number of the boleto manually, and all the information from the boleto will be automatically loaded on the screen. This is also very important to notice that the bank is showing the user the relevant information from the boleto, so that minimizes cases of fraud. So it's important to notice that the information seen in the boleto is the same as the one that you are showing, that you're seeing on the bank in the home banking site. So let's look at the flow of a typical boleto payment. So the user would select boleto at the time of the purchase, and they will be redirected to the voucher, the cash voucher. Then the user here has two options. They can either walk to a store nearby and pay for that boleto, or they can go to their home banking site and complete the purchase. And after that, the merchant gets notified. Now it will depend on the provider they use to provide this type of payment in Brazil, whether this notification is within a few minutes or on the next business day. So here are some of the best practices that we recommend when accepting boleto bancario in Brazil. The first is that the design of the boleto that you can see here, this is the official version, which is not really designed for a mobile experience. So if possible, if your provider allows it, you should expect them to give you the tools to customize your boleto to include your logo, your invoice number, so the user knows that that boleto is for the purchase that they were doing, and make sure that you're always asking for the CPF, the Brazilian national ID of the user. Nowadays, as Michelle showed before, there's a big number of users that pay using their mobile device. So it's increasingly common for a user to go to the kiosk, to the store, and pay without even printing the boleto. So if possible, if your provider allows it, try to provide a non-printing option for your users. Now let's move to Mexico. Similar case to Brazil, cash payment methods are by far the biggest alternative payment methods besides credits and debit cards, accounting for 19% of e-commerce transactions. And in Mexico, the biggest player in the industry for cash is called OXXO. As the same thing as boleto, Mexicans are very used to paying with OXXO in convenience stores spread everywhere over Mexico, with more than 16,000 payment locations. You're guaranteed that you're going to have an OXXO store close to your home. And again, it's very important to note that you don't need to have a bank account to pay with this service, which is really important because more than 50 or even 60% of Mexicans are still unbanked. So it's basically the only way to reach 50 or 60% of the population. And here on the left, you can see a typical voucher for OXXO. Where you can either get a barcode or a numeric code to make the purchase. Now let's look at the typical flow to make an OXXO payment. Here you have a checkout, and at the moment of checkout, you would select OXXO at the payment method. The user would see the voucher, and they would print it. And then they just need to visit one of the 16,000 OXXO stores nationwide to make the purchase. Again, this is something that it might sound weird for someone not living in Latin America, but this is very common in these countries. So to summarize, the user selects OXXO, they get the voucher, then they go to an OXXO location, and the merchant gets notified. Now, some of the best practices when accepting OXXO in Mexico are, again, similar to Boleto. An increasing number of users are making payments with their phone, so you should expect from your provider to allow you to render this voucher on a mobile device natively. And also, and this is very important, you want the payment confirmation to be as fast as possible. In most industries, if you provide instant gratification, you're most likely the user will want to pay again with your service, increasing the lifetime value of that user. So it will depend on the provider they use, but if possible, ask them to provide you with instant confirmation for an OXXO payment. Now let's move to Argentina. Again, also in Argentina, cash payments are very big compared to other alternative methods besides cards. And the two biggest players in the cash sector are Pago Fácil and Rapipago. Argentinians are very used to paying their monthly bills in either of these stores, like electricity, gas, and TV. There are over 6,000 locations spread across Argentina of these services. And again, the user doesn't need to have a bank account to make the purchase. So this is how a typical voucher would look like. The user will print this voucher and then go to a Rapipago or a Pago Fácil store to make the payment. And the same as Boleto and OXXO, you should target to have immediate confirmation from these payments. If we move to Colombia, here the picture it's a little bit different, with bank transfers having a bigger piece of the pie, but still cash are the biggest alternative payment method. Some of the biggest players here are Efecti, Davivienda, and Baloto. In the case of Efecti and Baloto, they offer a variety of payment services, including money orders, payments, recharges, and collections nationwide. And Davivienda is actually a Colombian bank that renders its services to individuals, company, and they also work in the rural sector. So with these three combined, there are more than 50,000 payment points available in the country. And here you can see on the right some of the very typical vouchers for each of these methods. As you can see, the two biggest options are either a code, a numeric code, or a barcode. And Colombians in this case are very used to paying with this. Now let's move to Chile. In Chile, it's pretty different from the rest of the countries, where cash takes a smaller part of the chart, and debit cards exclusively via WebPay take a more important role here. So when you select WebPay in the time of the purchase, the user has the option to pay with either credit cards or debit cards within their portal or with bank transfer. So WebPay, it's a household name in Chile. People are very used to paying via WebPay. And as I mentioned, it works for debit cards and credit cards, also for bank transfers. There's no cost for the end user, and the notification takes less. Within a few minutes, you get the confirmation of your payment. Now, in cash, the biggest player is called Servipago. There are more than 1,200 payment locations in Chile. It's by far the biggest cash payment method. And besides using this for payments, a lot of little and medium businesses are handling their finances using Servipack, which allows them to collect payments online, but also to pay their employees. And like all the other cash payment methods that we mentioned before, Chileans are very used to paying with this, and they use basically, for the most part, to pay with for their monthly bills. Now we're gonna move a little quicker to the rest of the countries in LATAM. In the case of Peru, cash takes a big portion of the payment mix, being the two players Pago Efectivo and Western Union. In Uruguay, also cash it's big. It's very in the culture of the Uruguayans to go to the Red Pagos and Habitat stores to buy tickets to concerts, to pay their bills. And you can find any of these stores within a few blocks from your house. There's some also local cards like Oca, for example. We have a huge adoption in the country, so it's very important to also keep that in mind. And finally, in Paraguay, you can see here that the pie looks pretty different from the rest of the other countries. Paraguay is a little bit behind. International credit cards are still king in Paraguay by a large margin. But we are seeing that the picture is changing slowly, with cash taking a bigger role in e-commerce. And being the two biggest players, Aquí Pago and Pago Express. With roughly, I would say, 50% of the market share for each, maybe a slightly edge on the Pago Express side. So that's it from us, from the local. I'll hand it to you, Mike.
All right, great. Thank you very much to you both for presenting. I thought that was excellent. Lots of great insights on alternative payment methods. So thank you. We did receive a few questions, so I think let's go ahead and get right to those. The first question that we received, can you speak a little bit more about the confirmation time for the different cash payment methods?
Sure. So it will depend on all of these countries. It will highly depend on the provider that you use to make these payments. So in the case of Brazil, you can either find a provider that gives you a service with immediate confirmation within 15 and 45 minutes, but the more traditional confirmation time is usually on the next business day. The same case in OXXO for Mexico, or Rapipago and Pago Fácil in Argentina. Let me think about the other countries. In Colombia, Efecti and Baloto are also immediate, but in the case of Davivienda, it might take up to 24 hours. And Servipack in Chile, for example, it also is up to 1 business day.
This is very relevant to keep in mind for merchants when implementing these payment methods, that most likely the order will go to a pending status because they need to wait for the user to actually go and pay. Even if they pay online, there might be a delay. And even if they get instant confirmation, there might be a few minutes of delay where the transaction, the order, needs to go to a pending status.
All right, great, thanks. Let's go ahead and move on to the next question. Getting back to boletos for a moment, can you talk a little bit about the fraud rate when paying by boletos, and then talk a little bit about whether or not it's possible to receive a chargeback when a customer pays by a boleto, and if there are chargebacks, if you can speak a little bit to the process.
Sure. So traditionally, there hasn't been much fraud around boleto. There are a few particular cases in the history of boleto where based on some bugs or some glitches that the payment method itself had. Some fraudsters were able to actually increase those levels of fraud, but I would say that overall is under control. When it comes to chargebacks, for the traditional boleto, the one getting confirmation in the next 24 to 48 hours after the payment, there's no such thing really as a chargeback. For the near real-time confirmation, the one with 15 to 45 minute confirmation window, the user has the option to actually go and cancel the boleto during the same business day if they paid for that boleto via online banking. So that's also something that merchants need to consider, and it can be treated in a similar way to a credit card chargeback, with the advantage here that it can only show up during the same business day.
All right, thank you. Next question, is there non-printed option for OXXO as the previous one from Brazil?
Yes.
Yes.
So in the case of thank you. In the case of boleto, as we said, it's possible to pay using the numeric code. So there's really no need for the user to print out the ticket and have the clerk read the barcode. Same happens with OXXO. And this is the trend that we are seeing with most of the payment methods in Latin America, where they used to have a barcode, but now they're migrating towards a barcode-less system, which obviously creates less friction and makes the whole process easier for users to pay and for merchants to get faster confirmation.
All right, great. Another question about OXXO. Is there a way to go ahead and pay OXXO via online banking?
No. Users can do that for boleto, but for OXXO, for the time being, users need to go physically to any of the OXXO store to pay with cash.
Okay, good to know. Next question, kind of combining about boleto and OXXO. Given that those are primarily desktop focused in terms of the user experience and involve vouchers, can you talk a little bit about how prevalent printing is available to people, and whether you expect at some point in the future that there will be either apps or ways of being able to do this on mobile devices?
Yeah, absolutely. As we showed during the presentation, many of the local providers are already using mobile versions of the boleto and the OXXO vouchers. I think Federico will show an example there. And the flow is essentially the same, but obviously it'll be optimized for a mobile device, and in some cases even optimized for users, just in the case of boleto, just copying the numeric code from the mobile version and then switching over to their home banking application on their phone and pasting that numeric code to pay seamlessly.
All right, great. Next question. Can you talk a little bit about e-wallets, whether it's PayPal, PagSeguro, kind of where those fall within payment methods for LATAM in terms of acceptance and prevalence?
Yeah. So historically, wallets haven't been really popular in Latin America. We are starting to see a few players pushing basically for their wallets to become relevant, and also some merchants creating their own wallets with a closed loop solution where users can actually top up those wallets by using these cash methods that we presented, and then keeping an account balance within the merchant itself. So that's a trend that we are seeing in Argentina, for example. It is slowly growing, and in the rest of the markets, we are starting to see something similar. So it's probably a trend that will grow over the next few years.
Okay, great. Next question. What are the industries that you can accept for acquiring? Or perhaps put another way, are there specific industries where you're not able to go ahead and serve as an acquirer?
Yeah, so I think that question is specifically for dLocal and our model. We operate with low risk merchant. We don't have restrictions around the industry as long as it's a low risk industry.
Okay. Next question is an interesting one, I think, deals specifically with international card adoption. So what would you contribute as the reason for the high rate of international card adoption in countries like Paraguay against other LATAM countries? Are there, the user asks, are there other domestic markets that are trending this way at all versus using local payment methods?
That's a really good question. So it really depends on the players in each market. In the case of Paraguay, there's a really strong player called Bancard, which is not only issuing cards but also doing acquiring. And basically, it depends on how also they price the different products. In countries like Uruguay or Argentina, a local card, so a card that is eligible for local transactions only, will typically be cheaper than an international card, and that's one of the reasons why it gets a lower adoption. So it really depends on how the different players are, pricing this and approaching the market.
All right. Next question. Is there a domicile requirement to process payments domestically in LATAM?
No. So one of our main, I would say the most popular model that we operate under is the merchant of record approach, where the PSP, in this case dLocal, is acting as the merchant of record. And then the merchant itself doesn't need to have necessarily a local operation or a local entity in the market.
All right. We have a couple more questions, so let's go ahead and get to the next one here. Can you talk a little bit about installments, particularly in countries in Central America? Are those a common way to pay? Any comments on that would be helpful.
Yeah, so installments are relevant all across Latin America. As we were explaining, there are two ways of issuing that credit. Either a relationship created between the user, so the payer, the buyer, and their issuing bank. In that case, the merchant is not really controlling that credit, and is the user paying directly, an interest rate, and in some cases it's even, interest free. If there's a promotion or anything with a particular card. And the second option, with the merchant doing that financing, and the merchant presenting the different payment options with the different interest rates, depending on the number of installments. We see everything from 1 to 12 installments being extremely popular in Latin America. And the higher the average ticket value, the higher the number of installments we see.
All right. Next question, which I think is also a really good one. How does the split for payment methods change for higher value orders or for more premium products? Does this change, the split, or do you end up seeing significantly more orders paid by cards versus local payment methods?
Yeah, that's a really good question indeed. So in some cases, with the combination of a product being on the pricey side, people might struggle with their credit cards, basically because they don't have enough credit in their cards to pay for that. So you might see a better conversion rate by offering cash, because usually for cash methods there's no limitation, and if there's a limitation, is typically higher than the credit card limit that they get access to. Also, it really depends on the industry. If it's a premium product or service, international cards might be available for that particular person. So it might be easier for that person to pay with the traditional methods versus the alternative ones. It's really ultimately a combination of the industry, the average ticket value, the type of product or service that you're trying to sell, and the different payment methods that are available in the market. Also depends on the business model. For recurring transactions, typically companies would start with offering local credit and debit cards, but then combine that with the local cash methods, where they allow users to pay 3 to 6 months, for example, in advance, because they don't want to have their users go on a monthly basis and pay, all basically on the OXXO store. They rather let them top up some balance into their account and pay, like I said, 3 to 6 months altogether.
All right, great. We've got one last question from the audience, so let's go ahead and take this one, then I think we'll go ahead and wrap things on up. This probably could be a topic for a separate webinar altogether, and perhaps would be a good one to go ahead and partner with down the road, but I still think it's worth maybe mentioning a couple of highlights here. Do you have any tips for managing payments fraud in Brazil? The submitter mentions that that's a problem for their particular line of business, and is something that they're seeing a lot of. Do you have any particular recommendations or kind of areas for them to go ahead and explore?
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree that this is a topic for a webinar itself, but basically the recipe that has worked out for us is a combination of local players providing fraud solutions with the popular international players, with an in-house engine with hard rules plus machine learning. If you combine all the different tools that are available, or just rely on a PSP with these tools, it'll probably be a good strategy. We are obviously talking about markets where typically fraud rates tend to be high, in Brazil, in Mexico, and other markets in Latin America. So it's always good for merchants to not only get good in-house tools, but also leverage the tools that are out there, or just rely on their PSP's solution for that.
Absolutely. Agree with you 100% on that. So, all right, Michelle, Federico, thank you so much for taking the time to go ahead and present today. I think that was terrific. You were generous with your time, and particularly answering questions from the audience today. So thanks so much. For those who would like to go ahead and rewatch today's webinar, or would like the slides from today's broadcast, we'll go ahead and have those posted on the MRC website by the end of this week. So those will be available just on the Resource Center, merchantriskcouncil.org is our website. If you're not a member, there's information about how to become a member on there. So I think that wraps things up for today. Thank you both once again for presenting. Thanks to everyone who attended and asked questions. Again, we've got other webinars already scheduled for later on in April. So we'd invite you to go ahead and register for those just at the MRC website. So again, thanks for your time. Have a great rest of the day. And if we didn't get a chance to go ahead and answer your question, I know Michelle and Federico had left their contact information up here on this final slide. So I'm sure if you have additional questions or would like more information about dLocal, please feel free to go ahead and get in touch with them. So guys, thank you very much once again for presenting, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon on another MRC Webinar Wednesday.
Thank you so much, Mike, and the whole audience.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Yep, bye-bye.